the Conservatives' Environment Minister, Mark Spencer, who joins us now. Today they're focusing on food security and a pledge to support farmers. A very good morning to you, Minister. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but wanted to start, as you might have seen from our broadcast, that we're focusing a lot on migration today. And I'm sure you also saw the news that at least 17 are dead and over 16 missing after a shipwreck of an attempted crossing in the Mediterranean yesterday. Stepping back from all of this, I just wonder whether you think the migration issues, the global migration issues that Europe and other continents as well are facing, do you think they've reached their peak, or do you think it's going to continue to escalate in the years ahead?
So I think clearly there are massive global challenges that are facing the country. That includes people crossing dangerous waters. I think it also includes that challenge of climate change, of keeping people well fed where they live. So I think there are huge challenges. We need to work with our international partners to try and solve those challenges, and of course make sure we support people in the countries that they live in, which is what we've done through our aid budget. So there are, of course, those huge challenges, but we need to address them here in the UK as well, which is what Rishi Sunak's plan is. To deal with those small boats and to make sure that we, if you like, turn off the magnet that is drawing people to the UK.
It's interesting hearing our report from Mexico today and the numbers. Close to 300,000 crossing into the US in just 1 month, the month of December. I guess it puts in perspective the scale of the small boats problem. And I just wonder the extent, I guess twofold, to which you think it is a more manageable problem than perhaps some countries face, and whether it's even plausible to outright stop the boats anyway, given the very clear lengths people are willing to go to seek a better life.
Yeah, I mean, of course, some people will be driven away from where they live if they're in the middle of a war zone. But I think there is a difference between those who are, genuine refugees, who we've actually got a very proud history as a UK of supporting people who've moved from Ukraine, find themselves in difficulty in Hong Kong, from Syria. We've taken, we've done our fair share as an international country. But of course, what we can't be is the safe haven for the world. So we've got to make sure that when we have a system that distinguishes between those who have a genuine need to be here and support those people, but make sure that those who are coming for economic reasons or other motivations, there is a system in place to go through.
So let's talk a little bit more about your department, Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. You're trying to highlight today that Labour hasn't pledged to keep a particular measure, but nor have they pledged to remove it. I don't quite understand what we're focusing on.
Well, so I think, number one, Labour have not shared with us what their taxation plans are. They certainly seem to be playing that very close to their chest. We suspect, we know that there's at least £2,000 worth of commitment to increase taxation through various means which they've talked about and commitments they've made. But when it comes to farming and to food security, of course, the way in which you pass that from generation to generation can be very challenging given the value of the asset. And Labour won't rule out putting huge amounts of tax on passing that farm down the generations to make sure that the family can continue, those family farms, which are the backbone of British agriculture, are there for future generations to carry on producing the great food for the country as we've seen over many generations.
So you're talking about an inheritance tax break for family farmers. But you're saying Labour won't rule it out. I mean, it's not in their manifesto in any way, shape or form. There's lots of things that your manifesto doesn't rule out. We could pluck anything out of the air. So it seems like a odd grab for something to talk about, and perhaps shows the sort of status of the campaign at this stage.
So I think, it's really, really important to family farms up and down the country. Of course, we could rule that out right now. If you ask me that question, I'd rule that out straight away. We wouldn't increase that inheritance tax on small family farms. And I think it is fairly symptomatic of Labour policy that they won't rule out these taxation increases. Whenever they're asked, they dodge the question and they won't say what they will do. What we do know is they've committed to over £2,000 worth of tax increases in the policies in which they've put forward already. And that's the most generous interpretation, actually, of of their commitments. And of course, when you get one of their representatives on a programme like this, they do everything they can to avoid telling you where that money is going to come from. Now, what we know is that's going to hit working families up and down the country after a general election if we end up with a Labour government. And I think it would be wrong of us not to highlight that, not to point that out, because that's going to be a huge burden on working families if that's where we end up. Now, there is an alternative, which is to vote Conservative, to re-elect Rishi Sunak, to continue to cut tax, as Rishi has suggested, to manage the economy in a way which we can continue to support our great public services, but do that without that burden falling on working families.
In your assessment, which is not necessarily backed up by all analysis, let's talk about this vote and where we are in this campaign. You no doubt saw that Grant Shapps, the Defence Minister, said quite clearly yesterday this is now about managing the size of the Labour majority as opposed to seeking outright victory. Do you regret that talking point has come out, whether it's from him or other members of the party in the last few weeks? Because it's not that appealing, is it, to try and say, vote for us to reduce the size of our loss? No one wants to vote for a loser.
No, absolutely. I'm fighting for every single vote, and I'll be out there later today once I've concluded your interview, once again on the doorsteps of Sherwood Forest, fighting for all the votes that I can secure. And I think the message that the party is trying to deliver is that there is an alternative, of course, which is to stick with the steady ship, which is Rishi and the Conservative Party, not put all of that at risk. And we've got an obligation to fight for every single vote from now until polling day. And that's certainly what I will be doing, and members of the Conservative Party up and down the country.
Mark, I wanted to also ask if you thought that Boris Johnson was the right antidote to the Nigel Farage threat to your party.
Well, Boris was a fantastic Prime Minister, and certainly, in delivering what he did for the COVID vaccine, in making sure that he put us front and centre in the fight for Ukraine. There were huge achievements of the Johnson campaign, but Boris is no longer a member of Parliament. He's stepped back from politics, and I think now, we've got a Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak who has steadied the ship, who's moving us forward. And I think, let's just concentrate on the huge tax challenge that is coming from a future Labour government, to make sure we communicate those messages, that we get out there and we make sure working families understand that actually they want to cut their tax and support public services, then they need to vote for Rishi. Because there are only two people who will be Prime Minister. It is either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. And if you don't vote for Rishi, if you vote for one of those other smaller parties, then you will end up with Keir Starmer by accident.